Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and to all the young people in the audience. It is also good to see you here on this very special occasion. My name is Napoleon Bell, and I am the Executive Director with the City of Columbus Community Relations Commission, and I welcome you on behalf of our Commission and our Commission Chair, Mary Howard, and also our Commissioner, Tom Diamond, who is here also. We hope that you take what you have learned today and keep that message alive so that you and others will never forget the atrocities of the Holocaust. At this time, I would like to call forward the Downtown High School Honor Guard with honored Jewish war veterans to present the colors. Then Councilmember Herschel Craig will lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance, followed by our Mistress of Ceremonies, Judge Rita Epler.
Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. I'd like at this time to honor and recognize the Jewish I have the distinct privilege of recognizing and honoring our Jewish war veterans, Mr. Saul Laba, the former state commander of the Jewish war veterans, former commander of the Jewish war veterans Capitol Post, number 122, Ohio, still very active in the National Jewish War Veterans, and the Central Ohio's Capitol Post 122 of the Jewish War Veterans of the United States of America, the national organization. The oldest local chapter was founded in 1896. And in its heyday, the local Jewish War Veterans head count was 475. Now there are less than 130. Each Memorial Day weekend, the remaining local war vets place American flags on hundreds of veterans' tombstones. Wherever one of our members die, a plaque is placed on the memorial wall at the Jewish Community Center. And also I'd like to recognize the Jewish war veteran, Steve Silkskin, and there's not a lot of information, but if they're here, if they would please stand, both of them. Would you please honor them with applause? Gentlemen, thank you so much. As chair of Columbus City Council's Veterans Affairs Committee, we want you to know how much we love you and we appreciate you for your service. God bless you, and God bless the United States of America.
Welcome to the 28th Annual City of Columbus Holocaust Remembrance Program. My name is Rita Epler, and I have the honor of being able to serve as the Master of Ceremonies today. We are grateful to have the opportunity, under the auspices of Mayor Michael Coleman, to gather together in City Hall chambers to observe these days of remembrance and honor the memory of those who perished in the Holocaust. This program is sponsored by the City of Columbus, Mayor Michael Coleman, the City of Columbus Community Relations Commission, in cooperation with the Jewish Federation of Columbus and its Holocaust Education Committee. We would like to recognize a number of other distinguished members in our audience from our community. We have Hugh Dorian, City Auditor, a representative from Sherrod Brown's office, Police Chief Kim Jacobs, Safety Director Mitch Brown, and Councilwoman Priscilla Tyson. And if I've missed any others, my apologies. Thank you all for your continued support and your attendance here today. Thank you also to Napoleon Bell and the Executive Director of the Community Relations Commission and to our Downtown High School Honor Guard. In addition to the two veterans, Mr. Lobb and Mr. Silkin, that we have already recognized, I also want to recognize and appreciate all other veterans that are here in our audience today. From the Columbus Jewish Federation, we acknowledge also the President and CEO, Gordon Hecker, and Debbie Sugarman, the Chair of the Holocaust Education Committee. We also want to take this opportunity to acknowledge Huntington National Bank for their continued partnership in the Federation Holocaust Education activities and recognize Stephanie Hazelwood. And of course, our thanks to the survivors who are present with us here today. This Holocaust Remembrance Program is in large part about educating the next generation to be a more tolerant people and remain ever vigilant. We therefore recognize the students present here today in City Hall chambers that represent a variety of schools from around Central Ohio. We have students, and I guess most of them up here in the balcony, from Bexley Middle School, from Dublin Kaufman High School, Eastland Fairfield Career Center, Hilliard Bradley High School, and Hilliard Davidson High School. Our first Jewish councilperson, Councilwoman Eileen Paley, was going to be saying a few remarks to us here today, but unfortunately I understand that she's under the weather and not able to be with us. But she is definitely in our thoughts and wanted to be here today. And now it is my pleasure to call upon Mayor Michael Coleman, who's going to share his words of welcome. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And this is my 14th year as mayor, and my 14th year as mayor participating in this very important and vital event to our city, our state, our country, and indeed the entire world. And many more years before then as well when I was on city council. This event is an opportunity to remember. To remember so that we will never repeat again in our country, anywhere in the world, what happened with respect to the Holocaust. Imagine those young people up there that are sitting up in the balcony right now. Some 11 million people were murdered during the Nazi regime. Imagine that, 11 million people. 6 million Jews, more than that. 5 million other folks who were murdered. What's the population of the state of Ohio? About 11 million people. Imagine 11 million people being wiped out off the face of the earth. And I want you young people right now to look to your left and then look to your right. And imagine the person that you're sitting with right now, if they were part of the Holocaust, would not be alive today. Devastating. And we need to remember that. We need to remember it because if we don't remember the atrocities, who knows? It could happen again. So we cannot allow it to ever happen again. So I welcome each of you today to light these candles, to listen to our speaker, to give us great insight of what it means to be a survivor of the Holocaust. We have survivors right here in the city of Columbus, many of whom are sitting in this front row. who I view of heroes to humanity, who have led the way over the years so that we cannot ever repeat this again. Again, welcome, and this standing tradition will continue this year and every year hence. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mayor Coleman. Your words are always heartfelt, and your continued support for the annual Holocaust Remembrance Program is greatly appreciated. We are here today to recall, memorialize, and bear witness. We recall the events that led to the Holocaust and those who helped bring an end to it. We memorialize those who were lost, and we bear witness to those who survived. The lessons of the Holocaust are manifold and complex. While theologians, philosophers, and academics still struggle to come to grips with the implications of the Holocaust, some of its lessons are simple to grasp, if only we have the opportunity to reflect on it. As part of our preparation for today's Yoam Hashoah observance, students around Central Ohio studied the Holocaust and were asked to reflect on what they had learned. One of those students, Delane Rice from St. Anthony School, wrote, "The way to show people the terrible effects of hatred is by using history as a lesson. Our generation needs to help each other to not make the same mistakes again." We therefore begin today by recalling some of the events that led up to the Holocaust, with that aim in mind. The rise of Nazi Germany after World War I set the stage. The first concentration camp, Dachau, was established in 1933 as a prison in a process to instill fear into a population and silence political opposition. Boycotts of Jewish businesses began. Jews were barred from educational institutions, hospitals, professional employment, public parks, libraries, and beaches. Anti-Semitism grew until the Jews were stripped of citizenship through the Reich citizenship laws. Then the infamous Nuremberg laws of the Third Reich of 1935 formally segregated Jews by barring intermarriage, household employment, and the display of national symbols by Jews. The world was not completely unaware of the developments, but the response of the world was put to the test on Kristallnacht, the night of broken glass, a government-sanctioned terrorist action during the night and early morning hours of November 9th and 10th of 1938. Hundreds of synagogues throughout Germany were destroyed. Jewish businesses were looted and destroyed, and tens of thousands of Jews and opponents of the Nazi regime were interned into concentration camps. Sadly, as Elie Wiesel stated, the world did not want to believe, and the world stood silent. As Nicole Beckman, a Bexley Middle School student, astutely stated, when someone witnesses discrimination and keeps silent, they are showing the perpetrator that it is okay to continue this behavior in the future. Silence is encouragement, silence is condoning. While the Holocaust was a long, systematic process over many years, Kristallnacht is viewed by many as the tipping point toward the implementation of Hitler's final solution, the genocide that was the Holocaust. Without significant response from the international community to Kristallnacht, the discrimination and destruction continued to progress. That silence allowed for the slow process to continue over several years, a process to separate and dehumanize until ultimately an entire people was dehumanized. When the Nazis and their allies implemented the final solution, the Jews and other groups identified for extermination, such as homosexuals and gypsies, fit squarely into a category of others that no longer had a right to live. We are here today to acknowledge that hatred is rarely without contagiousness. Whenever any group is discriminated against, it's usually just a matter of time until others are included. Between 1940 and 1945, the Nazis, SS, killed about 1 million Jews and tens of thousands of other prisoners of war in Auschwitz. In Lubin, concentration camp known as Majdanek, over 100,000 people died. Majdanek has the distinction of the largest one-day shooting operation in the Holocaust. 18,000 Jewish prisoners were killed in one day. Another concentration camp, Theresienstadt, was presented by the Nazis as a model Jewish settlement. It was a prison that held many artists, scientists, musicians, and scholars, and it was primarily a stopping point on the way to extermination. Tens of thousands of Jews passed through, with only a very small minority surviving. One young man, born in 1921, named Pavel Friedman, who was incarcerated at Theresienstadt and then later killed in Auschwitz, made his own reflections on what was yet to be termed the Holocaust through a famous poem called The Butterfly. He wrote, "The last, the very last, so richly, brightly, dazzling yellow. Perhaps if the sun's tears would sing against a white stone, such a yellow, it carried lightly way up high. It went away, I'm sure because it wished to kiss the world goodbye. For 7 years I've lived in here, penned up inside this ghetto, but I have found what I love here. The dandelions call to me, and the white chestnut branches in the court. Only I never saw another butterfly. That butterfly was the last one. Butterflies don't live in here, in the ghetto." Jews gradually began to understand the goal and the magnitude of what was happening. An organized resistance began, both in Jewish groups and by joining other armed national resistance organizations. The efforts were valiant and at times successful, but in the end, nothing could bring back the 6 million Jews that were lost and the 11 million total lives taken by the Nazi regime. Jewish life in Eastern and Central Europe was almost completely decimated, and most of those who survived were changed forever. Only 3 years after the end of World War II, the General Assembly of the United Nations established the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. As atrocities have continued in the aftermath of the Holocaust, in Sudan, in Rwanda, in Kosovo, we as citizens of a free country are called to attention to protect these human rights for all people, here at home and around the world. We are called to recall, memorialize, and bear witness to their stories and to learn from them and to work to prevent the repetition of these atrocities. Collectively as a society, and each one of us as individuals bears this responsibility. As difficult as the Holocaust is to grasp, we again learn from our students the basic lessons. Caitlin Smathers of Eastland Fairfield Career Center reflected on what she learned about the Holocaust and wrote, "Change starts with an example. If we want things to change, we have to be that change. We can start by standing up to change and to prevent things from worsening." One example of change is our keynote speaker here today. We are going to hear a unique story about silence of a different kind, a story of one family's path for staying together. We are privileged to have with us today Sharon Pitlock Silver from Chicago, Illinois. She is the sister of Debbie Pitlock Ecker, a member of our Columbus Jewish community. Ms. Silver was a Jewish child hidden during the Holocaust, and is with us today to share her story. Many who know Mrs. Silver are familiar with her story of being raised in Cleveland, Ohio, studying education at The Ohio State University, marrying David, and raising her 3 children in Chicago. They know she is a grandmother of 5. She's involved in her community and her synagogue. What most do not know, what even her own siblings and her own children did not fully know for a long time, was the story of her biological parents and her very early years in Poland being raised by a childless Polish couple. With extraordinary measures taken by her relatives at age 5, her life and identity changed. At age 7, Sharon Pitlock's family was living in the United States, and they wanted to become a real American family. They agreed not to share the extraordinary measures, her past, and her identity. It was only later in life, with even more extraordinary events, that the secrets were revealed. We are fortunate to have Ms. Pitlach Silver with us today to share her amazing story that went untold for so long. It is my honor to call upon Ms. Silver as our keynote speaker.
Thank you. There are so many different things to be said. Is that better? Okay, tell me, is this better? Can you hear me? Okay. I think what I'm going to start is by telling you, among the many, many things I've never been, thank you, that I've never been able to understand, comprehend, assimilate, numbers. 6 million, how many is 6 million? I can't picture it. I can't picture 1 million, truthfully. In my family, we were fortunate enough to have this book, which was written by a first cousin. Back at the beginning of the 20th century, in the late 1800s and early 1900s, my dad's first cousin, Moshe Pitkovsky, had an interest in genealogy long before most people did. He kept notes, he did a lot of research, and that research was taken to Israel by his son Chaim Rabinowitz, and ultimately put into this book, which is called 9 Generations. The reason I bring this and the reason I want you to see it is to bring the number 6 million down to something we can understand. 1. We all know what 1 is. So, one family, the Pitlach family. And this is the result of the Pitlach family of what occurred during the Holocaust. Now, I know you can't really see this, but this page says, the victims of our family exterminated by the Holocaust. I'm going to turn the pages, and I want you to think of one family. There are about 25 names on each page. Well, that didn't work too well. Every 2-page spread is approximately 50 names. And that's just one family. Imagine what the world lost. Not only the family, but imagine the people who could have changed the world, the inventions, the health things, the paintings, everything. It's mind-staggering. 6 million is just incomprehensible. And again, I'm here before you to tell you the story of one, my story. I was born November 2nd, 1941, in the very small town of Knishin in Poland. Knishin was a village. It's still a village. There were approximately 3,000 people there. Half of them were Jewish, half of them were Catholic. Before the war, they lived together in harmony. They were friends. They helped each other. It was basically a farming community. Some of the things I've only learned in recent years because in the year 2006, along with my husband, my daughter, and my sister Debbie, we went to visit Knishin and discovered there were a lot of people living there who had known my family, who had known so many of the circumstances surrounding the deaths of so many of them. That was more than I had ever expected to learn. Here's the story that I was told. A woman was looking out her window and saw something she thought was very strange. She saw a young woman carrying a baby, but she was carrying the baby not the typical way you carry a baby over your shoulder or cradling in your arms, but down low by her hips. She thought that was strange enough that she walked outside to see, and she said she understood immediately that this was a Jewish woman with her baby, because at the end of the road, there were a couple of Nazi soldiers. As she watched, the woman dipped down, put the baby behind a bush, and turned and walked in a different direction, obviously hoping that if the soldiers were going to follow her, they would miss the baby. Obviously, that baby was me. I ultimately was taken to the local police station. Now, the police station in this town was not like a police station here. It was the second story of a little house right in the middle of the village. And there in the house, I was 10 months old at this time. In the police station, there was also someone who lived in the village who was a friend of the policeman's who was just hanging out with them. When I saw the man, I reached my arms out, and he picked me up. And he held me for a few minutes, and then he looked at the people in the room and said, you know, my wife Regina and I have always wanted a child. We want a family. I'm going to take this baby home to my wife. I'm going to give her to my wife. Don't tell anyone. It'll be our secret. And so I went from being Shulamit Pitluck to being Anna Ostrowska, the only child of Regina and Cheshire, and a Catholic child. I was baptized. I was cared for. I'm sure I was loved. I have very few memories of those first few years, but a couple of things really stand out. One of them, I had a little girlfriend. It seemed as if she was always with me. And we played directly across the road. I assumed it was a bombed-out house. I know it was a building that had been destroyed, and we played in the bricks and the wood and crawled around. Probably remember it because everybody kept yelling, don't go there, you're going to get hurt. You know, what child, if you say don't, wants to try? So the other thing I remember, in today's world, it sounds really strange, but I remember a man crawling in the window of my bedroom at night. I didn't know who he was, but you know what? He would bring me treats. He would bring me treats that you don't get in a country at war. A fresh apple, an orange, and when he couldn't get those, a small can of pineapple. So not knowing anything about him, he was nice. He was nice to me. He was kind. He smiled, and he brought me goodies. So he was one of the good guys. Can you imagine my shock a few years later? I was awakened from sleep by a loud banging on the door, a lot of yelling, a lot of screaming, a lot of crying. And then all of a sudden, this tall man in some kind of uniform ran into my bedroom, grabbed me, and took me out the door. There was a truck waiting. As he lifted me to the back of the truck, I looked up and saw his face. You probably have already figured that was the man who would bring me the fruit, who would crawl in the window of my bedroom. I did not know it at the time, but that was my father's oldest brother. Remember I said I was born November 2nd. I found to my dismay that November 2nd in Poland was a very significant day. I don't know whether it's countrywide, but in that area, November 2nd is comparable to our Memorial Day. It's the day that people remember those they've lost. November 2nd, 1942, the day I was a year old, was the day the Nazis entered into Knishin, murdered the first 75 people is the number we were told, and put the rest into cars to be sent to Treblinka. The difference between Treblinka and Auschwitz, Treblinka was a death camp. They killed 800,000 people in the 11 months that it was functioning. Auschwitz, for example, the concentration camps were work camps where they worked the people to death. What had happened then was my father's oldest brother, Akiva, jumped off the train. We're not exactly sure. Some say he bribed the guard. Some say he just, jumped, rolled off and into a ditch where he played dead. The guards shot at him, but missed him. When his two brothers, one of them was my biological father, saw him jump, they followed suit. They also jumped, and they were both shot. Many years later, Akiva became my, okay, back up, not many years later. Akiva became my dad in every sense of every word. Many years later, when he was ill in what was to become his final illness, we were talking one day, and we spoke very, very rarely about anything to do with the war years. And he said to me, if I had known that they would be killed, I would never have jumped. He'd been carrying that kind of guilt around with him for so many years. And I looked at him at the time and I said, Daddy, if you hadn't jumped, our whole family would have been gone because you jumped and you saved yourself. You saved me. Lived to see many wonderful kids, grandkids. He unfortunately didn't live to see his great-grandkids, but I can tell you they're pretty wonderful too. We came to Cleveland, Ohio, because that was where he had relatives. That's where he had a cousin who was willing to sponsor him. You know, that was another thing I could never understand. How, with everything that was happening and the countries of the world learning about it and knowing, why weren't all these shores opened? But they weren't. In order to come to the United States, you had to be part of a quota, and you had to have a sponsor. A sponsor was no little thing. That was someone who guaranteed that if you didn't have an income, they would take care of you. If you didn't have a home, they would house you. You would not become a ward of the state. So that was huge, and that's how we wound up in Cleveland. We lived first with one cousin, and after a few months it was decided that I would be better placed in the home of another cousin, one who had children, because that way I would learn English faster, I would become assimilated. So I lived with the second cousin almost a year. Around the time I was 7 years old, my dad, and I honestly cannot think of him as anything except my dad. If I refer to my biological father, I'll use the word father, but Daddy was the one who raised me and loved me the rest of my life and his. Anyway, I was 7 years old, and he came up to me one day and said, you know, I'm not going to be able to see you next weekend. He spent every weekend with me. He visited me a couple days during the week. He said, I'm going away, but when I come back, I'm going to bring you a new mommy, your own mom. I thought, that's pretty cool. I mean, by that time, you know, I had lived for a short while with my biological parents, with my Catholic parents, with my cousin Rose, with my cousin Eva. I was going to get my own mom and dad. How wacky to see someone walk in the door and say, hi, you must be my new mother. We moved into a home of our own, the three of us. We became a family. And one day, you know that talk, specifically you kids up there, when you have that parent talk, they sit you down, you know they've already talked together and decided what to say. I knew they had, because each one of my parents separately came up to me, fill in the blanks. Sharon, Daddy loves you very much, or Mommy loves you very much. We want to be a real American family. We don't want you to tell people that we're really your aunt and uncle biologically. From now on, just say how wonderful it was and how amazing that we all survived the war in different places and we were reunited. And here we are, a real American family. One of the things I don't think is talked about enough is the courage of survivors. These were people who lost everything and everyone. They lost their spouses, their parents, their grandparents, aunts and uncles. There was no one left. And yet they had the strength, they had the courage to start over again, try to rebuild their lives, create their families, and live as normally as they could. It's always been a source of awe to me. I'm not sure I would ever have that strength. So now we have a secret. Don't tell. I was 7 years old. I promised. I never told. I told my husband before we got married because I just didn't feel you keep something like that from your husband. But I told him he wasn't allowed to tell anyone either. So the secret went on. I had 3 wonderful kids. And unfortunately, my mom developed an awful disease. I think of it as the inside out of ALS. She was losing the ability to move all voluntary muscles, including her speech. And it was this time of year, about 10 years ago. My whole family was in Chicago to celebrate Passover. My mom was still living in Cleveland at the time, and she was there. She came down to breakfast that Friday morning, and she couldn't speak. Now, with a disease that continues on, the highs get lower, the lows get lower. That was the lowest yet. So we were all really saddened. It was a fairly somber mood. That afternoon, almost everyone had gone separate ways, and my son-in-law, who is very curious, very persistent, asks a lot of questions, true, doesn't settle for the easy answer. He started trying to draw her out. And this is the personal part of it that I keep looking over at my family over there. He looked at my mom and said, "Isn't it amazing how much Kenny looks like Bobby?" Bobby's my brother-in-law, Kenny is his son, and they do look so much alike. And my mom said yes and nodded. So Mark was really excited. So then he said, and, Danny really looks like Debbie. Luckily, we had a whole bunch of people in the family, and he finally ran out of people, and he said, "And what about Sharon? Who does she look like?" By this time, she was talking in short phrases. She said, "She's different." "What do you mean she's different? She didn't come from my body." "What?" So he figured, well, she's not always reliable in the words she says, so he went back in a different direction, asked a bunch of questions, came up with the same thing, and said, "You mean she's adopted?" And she said, "Shh, it's a secret." So then he didn't know what to do. He looks at her and he says, "But she knows, doesn't she?" "Shh, it's a secret." Well, guess what? It wasn't a secret anymore. That evening, our Sabbath starts Friday evening, and we had this beautiful Sabbath dinner. There were about 20 of us at the table. I walked into the dining room, I looked at everyone, and I got so choked up with emotion. When you've lost so many people and when you grew up without grandparents, without aunts, without uncles, family becomes so important. Not that it isn't important to everyone, but I looked around the table and I said, "Mom, in your life, did you ever think you would live to see this? There's not one person in this room that would be here if it weren't for you." There's a special prayer of gratitude, you say, when you've reached a moment that's very special. So we said the prayer, and I'm looking around the room and I'm going, oh my God, it doesn't get better than this. I didn't know that there were all these emotions going under the surface. My son had already talked to my daughter. They didn't know what to do. They're in a turmoil. The next morning, the whole family went to a park to play. And at one point, I noticed my daughter sitting with her Aunt Debbie. She's as close to her aunt as if she were a sister, and actually they're closer in age than my sister and I are. And I thought to myself, it's so nice. They always find time to connect. And then I happened to notice my sister talking to my husband. It's a really nice family. We're close. And then my sister came up to me and said, "Cher, we have to talk." And she put her arm around me. Now, those of you who see us together, it's Mutt and Jeff. She put her arm around me. We started walking. She said, "Sharon, I know." And I looked at her. I knew immediately. And I said, "What do you know?" And she said, "I know everything." So I burst out crying. So she burst out crying. Well, the truth is, the tears were tears of relief and joy because secrets become harder to keep with length of time. The worries that I had, how are my brothers and my sister, I have twin brothers, did I forget to mention them? How are they going to react to finding out that biologically we weren't, I can't even go there. Okay, what are my kids going to say when they find out that the grandparents who adored them and who they adored were not my biological parents? So here's what happened. They all knew. My brothers and sister all had found out. The one brother found a diary. Another brother was told the secret by my mom's aunt and uncle. My sister had a long talk with my mother where a conversation Mom and I had earlier was somewhat repeated, but not at the right way. Okay. My kids, why didn't they tell? They did this wonderful thing. Why didn't they tell? I have my own theories. Why didn't they tell? First of all, there was a lot of fear. They wanted to be an American family. An American family, you have your parents and your kids. They were an American family. They raised us so well, with great difficulty, but they did it. We have an attorney, a vascular surgeon, an optometrist, and a teacher. They raised 4 kids and educated 4. I, by the way, am the undereducated one in my family. Life goes on. You know, there's a church around the corner from my house, and I love reading their signs. And the sign that I just spoke to me was, wrong is always wrong, even if everyone is doing it. That's what I want to leave you with. And in closing, I will tell you this story. It's a well-known story. An old man was walking down the beach. It was after a storm, and there were a lot of starfish that had been washed up onto the beach. They can't get back in the water, and they die without water. And as the old man is walking, he's picking up as many as he can, throwing them back in the water, throwing them back in the water, throwing them back in the water. In the distance, a young runner was approaching him. He approached him and said, "Old man, what are you doing? Do you think you could make any difference at all?" And the old man quietly looked at him and said, "Well, maybe not, but I can make a difference to the ones I save." Think about that. One person's action can make a difference. One person made it possible for 24 of us to be sitting around the table. And I think that's the end. And if I leave you with anything, remember the man and the starfish. And remember, be the upstander. Be the person who's not afraid to speak up for the truth and not follow a crowd when they know in their hearts it's wrong. You know what? I forgot to show this, and I would like to. Feel free to do that. Can I just add a little postscript? When my dad died in 1981, my mom and I were cleaning out some of his things, and I was emptying his wallet. I got everything out of it, and it still felt there was a little lump in his wallet, and I stuck my finger in one of those little hidden pockets, and what I pulled out was his star, the yellow star that he had to wear. I know you can't see it too well, but I do want you to see it. It had 6 points, but as he tore it off his clothing, the 1 point ripped. He carried this with him every day in his wallet. I never washed it. I never ironed it. But imagine what that star meant and meant to him, that he always carried it.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Sharon, for sharing your story with us today. The experiences of the Holocaust and those who survived Nazi persecution are in danger of becoming just a distant memory, and ones that can too easily be set apart from our daily lives. We're privileged to bear witness to your story today and to honor the memory of your family. So thank you again. To honor the memory of the 6 million Jews that were murdered by the Nazis during the Holocaust, Rabbi Sharon Mars, president of the Columbus Board of Rabbis, will present 6 survivors to light candles. We welcome family members to join the survivors as they light candles if they wish. In addition to the 6 million Jews who were murdered in the Holocaust, there were also 5 million other individuals that were murdered by the Nazis, including trade unionists, people with disabilities, gays, gypsies, and Christians. There were also other non-Jews that, despite the grave risks to their own lives, were willing to shelter Jews that were being hunted by the Nazis. Reverend Victor Davis will present 5 representatives to light candles in memory of the 5 million individuals murdered by the Nazis during the Holocaust. We begin our candle lighting ceremony with the song Eli, Eli, written by Hannah Senish and performed by cantor Baruch Schiffman. Hannah Senish was a young woman from Hungary who moved to Israel and then volunteered to return to Europe to save Jewish lives. She parachuted into Yugoslavia, went to Hungary, and was then discovered by the Nazis and executed. She was known for her heroism and her poetry.
אלי, אלי, שלא ייגמר לעולם, החול והים של רישוש של המים, ברק השמיים, תפילת האדם, החול והים, רישוש של המים, ברק השמיים, תפילת האדם. La 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 la. La, la,
I call
la,
upon
la, la, la,
Mane
la.
Aronofsky to light the first candle.
La 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 la. La 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 la. La 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 la. La la la. La 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 la. La 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 la. La 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 la. La la la. La la la.
I call upon Alfred Tibor to light the second candle. I call upon Emma Mitzel to light the third candle. I call upon Sam and Tova Kurtz to light the fourth candle. I call upon Eva Haig to light the 5th candle. I call upon Helen Freed to light the 6th candle.
I call upon Richard Isbell to light the 1st candle. I call upon Chief Kim Jacobs to light the 2nd candle. I call upon Thomas Diamond to light the 3rd candle. I call upon Erica Clark Jones to light the 4th candle. I call upon Reverend Ward Cornett III to light the final candle. First, they came for the communists and I didn't speak up because I wasn't a communist. Then they came for the Jews and I didn't speak up because I wasn't a Jew. They came for the trade unionists, and I didn't speak up because I was not a trade unionist. Then they came for the Catholics, and I didn't speak up because I was a Protestant. Then they came for me, and by that time there was no one left to speak for me.
Please rise for the memorial prayer, please. El male rachamim, shochein bameromim, ametzei menucha nechona, ale kanefei השכינה, במעלות קדושים וטהורים, כזוהרי הרקיע מזהירים ומזכירים את נשמות אחינו ואחיותינו וחסידי אומות העולם, נשים, גברים, ילדים וטף, צדיקים וצדקניות, אחינו בני ישראל הקדושים והטהורים, שנהרגו ושהומתו ושנשחטו ושניתלו ושמתו בכל מיני מיתות משונות בידי צוררי היהודים ואומות העולם. בעבור שאנחנו כאן בקולומבוס אוהיו מתפללים בעד הזכרת נשמותיהם הזכות והטהורות בגן עדן תהי מנוחתם לכן בעל הרחמים יסתירם בסתר כנפיו לעולמים ויצרור בצרור החיים את נשמותיהם הזכות והטהורות. אדוני הוא נחלתם וינוחו בשלום על משכבותיהם לקץ הימין. ונאמר אמן.
Seated. Thank you, Rabbi Mars, Reverend Victor Davis, to our candlelighters, and to Cantor Schiffman. We would like to also offer our sincere thanks to those who provided support and contributions to make this program possible: the Dash and Sugarman families, the Department of Technology, the Department of Public Safety, the Department of Public Services, the Epstein Memorial Chapel, the Holocaust Education Committee, the Jewish Family Services, and the Kroger Company. Special thanks to all the schools, teachers, and administrators who continue to educate about the Holocaust and help facilitate the students' participation today. We can never take for granted the moral compass of our society. We must strive personally, as a city, and as a nation, never to lose this moral compass. The experience of the Holocaust teaches us that we must continually be vigilant in this regard. It is particularly fitting today in our world to reflect on the potential for each of us to make a difference. Please join us as we leave the chambers today for the procession that will be led by Mayor Coleman to the Patel Memorial Park, where the Freedom Statue created by Albert Tibor was dedicated 26 years ago. As you leave, please take a flower to place at the monument where the conclusion of our ceremony will take place. Carts are available at the north entrance for anyone who needs assistance. And thank you all for being here for today's program.
Thank you very much.